The air around me was already trying to kill me, and I had been on the ground for less than a minute. My suit display flashed red across 3 separate readings at once. Heat, pressure, toxic gas saturation. Any one of those numbers would have sent an alien soldier running back to their ship. I just tightened my grip on my medical kit and kept walking toward the wreckage ahead of me. "Talia, report," said a voice in my ear. It belonged to Owen, my team leader, somewhere behind me in the smoke. "Still breathing," I said. "Barely counts as a joke out here, but I'm taking it." The planet was called Venal, and 3 hours ago, it had been someone's home. Now half its sky was on fire from a chemical cascade that had eaten through the upper atmosphere, and the ground beneath my boots was hot enough to soften rubber. Every alien species in the coalition had looked at this disaster and calculated the odds of survival, and every single one of them had come back with the same answer. Too dangerous, not possible. We regret to inform you. Every one of them except us. I want to tell you how we got here, because it still surprises me sometimes, even after everything. 6 hours earlier, I had been sitting in a coalition briefing room 3 systems away, listening to a distress call get translated in real time. The voice on the recording belonged to a woman named Venal, an administrator on Venal, and even through 3 layers of translation software, you could hear the fear cutting through her words. She said the atmospheric processors had failed. She said the air itself had turned against her people. She said they had maybe half a day before the surface became unlivable for anyone. The room around me went very quiet. A representative from the Doran Assembly, tall and blue-skinned, stood up first. Their species could not tolerate temperatures above what we would call room temperature, and they explained, quite reasonably, that sending a Doran rescue team into that inferno would simply create more bodies for someone else to recover. Nobody argued with them. It was just true. Next came the Ithacan delegate, whose lungs could not process the specific toxins now flooding Verental's atmosphere. Then the Solvane, whose skin would blister and fail under that heat within minutes. One by one, every capable species in that room stood up, apologized, and explained why they could not help. Not because they were cowards, because their bodies were built for kinder worlds. I sat in the back of that room in my coalition medical uniform, and I felt something rise up in my chest that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite pride. It was something closer to recognition. We have a saying back home, somebody's gotta go. It doesn't sound like much until you're the somebody. I stood up before the meeting had even finished. Owen was 2 seats down from me, and he stood up at almost the same moment, like we'd rehearsed it, though we hadn't. Behind us, 6 more humans rose from their chairs across that crowded room. Every alien delegate turned to look at us the way you might look at someone who has just volunteered to walk into a burning building wearing a paper coat. "You do understand the conditions," said the Doran representative slowly, like she was speaking to a child. "The heat alone would cause organ failure in most species within minutes." "We're not most species," Owen said. "That's not arrogance, by the way. It's just a fact people learned about us the hard way, a long time ago, back when the Coalition first found our little blue planet and ran their standard threat assessments on the local wildlife, the local diseases, the local weather patterns, and the local humans, who had somehow managed to survive all 3 for 200,000 years without any help from the stars. They call us Deathworlders. It wasn't a compliment when they first started saying it. I've come to like it anyway. So here I was, 6 hours later, walking through smoke thick enough to chew, carrying a medical kit toward a half-collapsed shelter where thermal scans showed at least a dozen life signs still holding on. "I see them," I said into the comm. "South wall of the shelter is down. I'm going in." "Copy that," Owen said. "Mira and Devon are clearing the east corridor. Watch your oxygen levels, Talia. Your suit's not built to filter this stuff forever." "Wasn't planning on staying for dinner," I said. I climbed over a slab of broken concrete, or whatever the Verental equivalent was, and dropped into the shelter through the gap where the wall used to be. Inside, the air was slightly better, though slightly is a generous word. A group of Verental civilians were huddled together in the dark, their skin a pale gray I would later learn was the color it turned when their bodies were starving for oxygen. Most of them looked at me like I was something out of a nightmare. I suppose from their point of view, I was. A creature in a strange suit, stepping out of fire and poison gas like it was nothing. One of them, an older man with long silver markings along his arms, pushed himself between me and the others, shielding them with his own body, even though he could barely stand. "It's all right," I said, keeping my voice slow and steady, the way you're trained to, when someone's scared enough to fight the people trying to save them. "I'm not here to hurt anyone. I'm here to get you out." My suit's translator caught up half a second later, turning my words into something his ears could understand. He stared at me for a long moment, his breathing ragged, and then he stepped aside. I got to work fast. 2 of the children in the group had stopped moving entirely, their small chests barely rising. I checked their vitals, dosed them with oxygen stabilizer from my kit, and watched their color slowly begin to return. An older woman had a piece of debris lodged in her leg, and I packed the wound as best I could while explaining to her, over and over, that she was going to be fine, that we were getting everyone out, that she just needed to hold on a little longer. "Talia, we've got an extraction window in 11 minutes, Owen said in my ear. "The gas concentration outside just spiked. You need to move them now." "Copy. I've got 12 here. 2 are non-ambulatory. Need a hand." "On my way." Getting a dozen frightened, weakened civilians moving through rubble in poisonous air while your own lungs are working overtime is not something they can fully prepare you for in training. You just do it. You pick people up when they can't walk. You carry the ones too small to carry themselves. You keep talking. Keep your voice calm, even when your suit is warning you that your own oxygen reserve is dropping faster than it should. We made it out through the gap in the wall, just as a coalition shuttle screamed down through the smoke and settled onto what was left of the street outside. Devon and Mira were already there, half carrying a group of survivors of their own toward the open loading ramp. I saw Devon's face for just a second in the firelight, and it was pale and streaked with sweat, but he was still moving, still pulling people up the ramp one after another. That's when I heard Owen's voice change. "Talia, I need you east, now. The corridor's collapsing, and Mira's still inside." My stomach dropped somewhere around my boots. I handed off the old man I was helping to one of the shuttle crew, and turned, sprinting back into the smoke without letting myself think too hard about what I was doing. I found Owen at the mouth of a narrow passage that had been a walkway 10 minutes ago, and was now half filled with rubble. He was pulling at a fallen support beam with his bare hands, muscles straining against a weight that should have needed machinery to move. "She's under there," he said, not looking up. "I can hear her." I dropped my kit and grabbed the other end of the beam. Between the 2 of us, we shifted it just enough. Mira's voice came from underneath, weak but alive, telling us she thought her leg was broken, but she could still move her arms. We dug her free piece by piece, ignoring the way the smoke burned down our throats, ignoring the readouts screaming warnings across our suit displays. When we finally pulled her clear, her face was streaked with dust and pain, but she managed a shaky laugh. "Took you too long enough," she said. "You're welcome," Owen said, already lifting her. We got her to the shuttle with maybe 90 seconds to spare before the corridor gave way completely behind us. I collapsed into a seat as the ramp closed, my whole body shaking with the kind of exhaustion that goes past your muscles and settles into your bones. Across from me, Devon was pressing a compress against a burn on his own forearm that he hadn't mentioned to anyone until just then. Mira sat with her legs stabilized, her eyes closed, breathing hard. 12 of us had gone down to that planet. All 12 of us came back up. I would learn later that we were the only rescue team, out of everyone who responded to that distress call, that could say that. The shuttle rose up through the burning sky, and I finally let myself look out the small window at Venal falling away beneath us. Fires stretched across the horizon in long orange scars. Somewhere down there, thousands of people were still waiting for more ships, more hands, more help. Our part was done for now, but the work was far from finished. I noticed one of the Venal children we'd rescued watching me from across the shuttle bay. She couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years old in human terms, her gray skin now slowly returning to its natural pale gold color as the stabilizer worked through her system. She was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite place. Not fear anymore. Something closer to wonder. "Why did you come?" she asked, her small voice carried through the shuttle's translator. The others said it was too dangerous. They said no one could survive it. I thought about how to answer that for a moment. I thought about the training manuals, about the coalition's official statements on emergency response protocols, about all the technical language people use to avoid saying something simple. Because you needed help, I said. And we could give it. She tilted her head, the way kids do when an answer isn't quite enough for them. But you could have died. Maybe, I admitted. But you would have died for certain. That's not really a hard choice, when you think about it that way. She didn't say anything else, just kept watching me with those wide, golden eyes, until she finally drifted off to sleep against the shoulder of the old man who had shielded her back in the shelter. We spent the next 2 days in orbit, running relief operations in shifts. More human teams arrived from other ships in the fleet, dropping down into the smoke and heat, again and again, pulling survivors from collapsed buildings and flooded lowlands and burning fields. I won't pretend it was easy, or that everyone made it. We lost a man named Callum on the second day, caught in a secondary collapse while pulling a family free from a fallen tower. I still think about him sometimes, about how he didn't hesitate, even after everything he'd already seen, even after every warning his suit had given him. He just kept going, because there were still people waiting. That's the part people don't always understand about us, I think. It was never about being fearless. None of us were fearless down there. I was terrified almost the entire time, my hands shaking even as I worked, my mind running through every possible way that ground could open up and swallow me. Fear didn't stop us. It just wasn't the only thing in the room. There was also the sound of Vrel's voice on that first recording, and the sight of that little girl's gray skin turning gold again, and the simple, stubborn refusal to let those two things stay separate. By the third day, the atmospheric processors had been repaired enough to stop the chemical cascade from spreading further. The fires were contained. The evacuation numbers climbed into the tens of thousands. Venal would take years to fully recover, but it would recover, and that was more than anyone had dared to hope for when that first distress call went out. I was called to a debriefing aboard the Coalition command vessel a few days later, standing in a room full of the same delegates who had sat quietly 6 days earlier, while explaining, one by one, why they couldn't help. This time, nobody was explaining anything. They were just watching me, and Owen, and the rest of our small, exhausted team, with an expression that had shifted from wariness into something else entirely. The Doran representative who had once called our biology reckless stood up first. "We owe you a debt that is difficult to measure," she said, her voice quieter than it had been before. "You went where none of us could. You did not hesitate." "We lost someone doing it," I said, before I could stop myself. "Don't make it sound cleaner than it was." The room went silent again, but it was a different kind of silence this time. Not the silence of people avoiding responsibility, the silence of people actually listening. "No one is pretending it was without cost," the Doran representative said gently. "That is precisely why we understand its value." I didn't have much to say to that. I just nodded and let the meeting move on to the practical matters of long-term relief efforts, resource allocation, and rebuilding plans. But something in that room had shifted, and I could feel it settle into place like a stone dropping into still water. For as long as I'd served with the Coalition, humans had been treated a certain way. Respected for our usefulness in dangerous postings, sure, but also kept at a careful distance, the way you might keep your distance from something powerful and unpredictable. We were the species other species quietly worried about. The ones whose homeworld had bred creatures so resilient that our doctors considered conditions lethal to most life forms as simply Tuesday. There had always been an undercurrent of caution in how they spoke to us, an unspoken question of what exactly we might do if we ever decided the rest of the galaxy was more trouble than it was worth. I watched that caution soften, just slightly, over the following weeks. It didn't vanish entirely. I don't think it ever will, not completely, and honestly, I'm not sure it should. But something had changed in how they looked at us. We were no longer just the dangerous ones. We were also the ones who came. A month after Venal, I received a message from Vrel herself, the administrator, whose distress call had started everything. She thanked me by name, along with the rest of the team, and told me that the shelter I had pulled those 12 people from had since become something of a memorial site, a place where the community gathered to remember what had almost been lost. She said the little girl I had spoken to on the shuttle, whose name I learned was Yona, had started telling everyone she wanted to become a rescue worker herself one day. Kessa said Yona liked to tell people that when the sky was on fire and the whole galaxy said it was impossible, someone still came anyway, wearing a strange suit and carrying a simple kit, and that when Yona asked why, the answer had been so ordinary it almost felt like a secret. Because you needed help, and we could give it. I read that message 3 times before I set it down. I think about Venal a lot, even now. I think about the heat and the smoke, and the particular sound a support beam makes, right before it gives way. I think about Callum, who never got to see the sky over that planet clear again. I think about the way an entire room full of powerful, capable species looked at a burning world, and, one after another, said they were sorry, they simply couldn't. And I think about the fact that somebody's gotta go isn't really about being fearless, or reckless, or better than anyone else. It's about understanding that sometimes the only thing standing between a person and disaster is whether someone else decides to show up. It's about knowing that your own fear doesn't get the final word, not when there's still a child waiting in the smoke for someone, anyone, to come find her. They begged the galaxy for help. Every species with the means to answer sat in that room and explained, calmly and reasonably, why they couldn't. We didn't explain anything, we just went. And when we came back, carrying the people we'd carried out of the fire, nobody in that room called us reckless anymore. They just called us home.